everyone, it's Fiona Bárcenas here again from my studio in Scotland, and I thought I'd just introduce you again to another little watercolour. It's very simple, it can be done in about 10 minutes and it's really quite small, so in comparison to my hand you can see how small it is, and it's just some quick and easy ones to do just to get you going with watercolour, and then we'll go a bit bigger as time goes on when you get braver. Okay, so the first thing that I do, I'll just pop that over there, and you don't really need to do an awful lot of drawing with this, which is really great. So I'm just going to make myself a bit of a horizon line, because this is a landscape, sorry, a seascape that we're doing. So I'm just going to put a faint line across like that, and that's just where I want my horizon line to be. And then the next thing I'm going to do is another wee trick that I have. So I'm going to put the ruler above the line that I want, and I've got a piece of wax here. It's just a wax candle that I've just cut some off, and what it does is it creates a resist. So I'm just going to rub that along the area exactly where my horizon is, okay? So, and then sometimes what I do is I just kind of rub it, and what it'll do is, the watercolour paper, it's got sort of hills and valleys, it's got dips in it, and the paint will just sit into the areas that's not got the resist on it. So if I just show you this painting again, can you see all this area that's got no colour in it? That's where I've actually put the wax. You can't see the wax, and that's what's so great about it, because it's translucent, but it leaves this resist, so it really works well for you. Okay, now you've seen that I had that whitish area in the middle there. I didn't put any wax up in the sky there, just in the water. Okay, and I might just bring the odd bit across like that too, just a wee bit. Okay, now as you know, up here in Scotland we have lots and lots and lots of mountains, so we might put trees in here, we might put some mountains, but we'll certainly do a mountain one as well. So the first thing I want to do is get some nice clean water, and I'm going to wet this. And remember, I've talked about watercolour before, and it really is, the reason it's called watercolour is because you use such a lot of water, and that's the key really to the whole thing, is making sure that you've got lots and lots of water. And I'm putting water on the bottom half as well, because it's really quite a quick way of doing your painting. So we're actually going to do two wee paintings so that one can be drying a bit whilst we start the other one. So you can see how much I've got. I'm just wiping away, and I've got a bit of kitchen roll here, paper towel, just to make sure that I've got that. So you can see how wet it is, see how shiny it is, and the paper is buckling a bit, but when it's small pieces like this I don't bother to tape it down or anything. I just use it as it is. I'll sometimes just use my brush to push it down whilst I'm working on it. So this was a really nice purpley effect. So let's have a look. If I mix some blue and pink together, get a nice lilac-y colour coming in first. So I'm going to do that, and I think that's what I'll do. I'll just use a pencil, I'll just push that down flat. And what I'm going to do is, you're just going to pull in, oh dear, that's very red. I wasn't expecting that, but this is the great thing about watercolour, is that you really don't know what to expect, and it's really great because you get some wonderful results. So I'm just pulling in some areas like that, and I'll also just put a little bit, can you see where it's skipping where I've put the wax on here? So I'll just put a tiny bit over there as well. Now I've got a bit of a bloom here, so I'm just going to tap that off a wee bit because I don't want that there. And I'll just put some more water just to push that back. Okay, and we'll try a bit more of the bluey colour this time. So the blue I'm using is actually ultramarine blue, and then I'm going to just take that in right on the top there and pull them up like this. And the same across here, so we're just going to just lightly go over. There we are. Now you can control the water a little bit by lifting up your paper, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not that keen on taping my watercolour paper down, because I really like to move my paper around. So I'm getting a sort of storm cloud, if you like, coming down there. It's looking a bit square, so what I think I'll do, I'm just going to let that settle a wee bit, and I'll just wipe some of that dampness off there. And I'll use my pencil just to push it down again. And then I've got a thirsty brush in here, just pushing some of that up. Just tap in there a little bit. Let's go. So you can actually change the shape a little bit with some paper towel and get as much or as little from the middle as you want. If you want a really bright sky, you can put a lot of highlight in, and if you don't, you can just lift it out, put darker in. So I'm just putting a few more little bit of dramatic ones in here, and I'm just pulling them in from the sides to this central point here. There we go. Maybe just a bit more on there. Perhaps there. There we are. Just put a wee bit of water just to soften that edge. So if you think you've got a bit of a hard edge, just some really clean water, you can just use that to just blur your edges again a wee bit. And I'll just move that round. So you just move it round and you'll see the paint moving with it. Can you see here it's just starting to sort of puddle a little bit and creating this nice effect. There. And the trick with skies is the less you do to it, the better. If you really start fiddling about with skies, they inevitably go wrong. So the best thing to do is get your paint on and just leave it be. I'll put a bit of the blue in the bottom of the water, and I'll just bring it across like that, and across, oops, on that side. And I'm using, sometimes I use an angled shader that I've got here, an angled brush, or just a flat brush to do this. Because you're just working on small areas, you don't need a big hake brush, which is a big fluffy brush that takes lots and lots of water. Now I'm going to leave that one now just to dry off, and I'll get my next one. So what we'll do with this one is just slightly different. I'm going to put different colours in it and we'll get a different effect, but it's a very similar technique. So I've got my ruler again, and I'm going to have a wee bit more sky this time, and I'll just put a line in, just a guideline like that. Okay, and I'm going to use my wax again and do a bit of a wax resist. So we'll do the wax resist here, like that, and maybe a bit more in the water. There you are. So this wax resist technique is really quite simple to do, and it's really effective, and especially when you're doing small paintings. I'm ever so sorry, but this is really driving me a bit crazy, so I'm going to have to just straighten it up. There, that's slightly better. I don't think it's too much better, but it's a wee bit better. Right, okay, so we've waxed everything up. Now what I'm going to do is actually just mix the colours that I'm going to need, and I know that I would really quite like to make a nice orangey yellowy sky, so I'm just going to make sure that I've got my paper, I've got my colours mixed, because that's the only problem that you do tend to have, is that if you've not got your, you need your paint to go, if you like, and I'm going to use some blues. I think I might use some of this nice cerulean blue, and that there. Okay, so what I've done is I've just added some water, a wee bit of water, to some of my colours on the side there. Please excuse me. Right. And again, what I'm going to do is just wet my paper really well, like this. Nice wet brush, and get lots of water on there. And what happens is, when the water goes on, it actually lifts the fibres of the paper up, and then they kind of, they're laying flat when it's been cold pressed, and then as you add the water they start to lift up and they grab hold of the paint, and as it dries they pull the paint back down into the paper again, and that's what gives it all this lovely softness. So we've got a bit of a buckle on our paper again, but we won't worry about that. I'll just give you a quick glance of the painting that I'm wanting us to do. So this is a nice little scene, and I was saying about maybe doing some mountains and a bit of colour there. So that looks like a nice wee glen in Scotland for you there. So here we go. So this is just starting to go a wee bit matte, and that's about how you want it to be. Let me get something just to hold that flat. Okay, now what I'm going to do, the biggest problem you have when you're wanting to put yellow in a sky, when you've got blue, is that it'll go green. So when we put the blue in here now, we're going to be a little bit more choosy where we put it, because we want to leave some white parts so that we can put some yellow in there. I'll just lift that. Oh, we've just got a bit of a dribble. I'll get my tissue, and again you can just dab away if you think you've got any bits that you're not wanting. Okay, I'll just re-wet that middle bit. And that's the thing, is keep it wet all the time. That's the trick with watercolour, is that you really do need to make sure that your paint can flow, and it can only flow if this is nice and wet. I might put a bit of contrast in there, so I might put a wee bit of the a darker blue in here, which is the ultramarine. But just so that it just gives, sometimes it's quite pretty just to have a few different blues going on. Can you see that? Looks a bit more realistic. Not that these are really that realistic, they're more kind of fantasy-ish ones. So we've got my blue on there, and I'd like to put some in my water now. So that's dried a bit, so I'll just wet my brush a bit more, and I'll just take that over like that, and you're just going side to side with your brush. I think I've put quite a bit of wax on this because it's resisting quite some. Now we do add more colour to this as we go along, so you don't have to get every colour in straight away, so don't worry about that. And I'll put a bit of that ultramarine in too, like that. There we are. So that's quite nice. Now I think I'll go in with the orangey colour now, and I'm going to, oh goodness, look. So this is Cadmium Orange, and I can actually, if I push that down a wee bit there, I can maybe just put a little spot up here without it going too green or anything. There we are, and just add the odd little bit. And then maybe just a little bit stronger colour here and there. So I'm still being a little bit careful where I put it. I don't want to rub too much into the blue, because that's when you can end up with green. It doesn't usually do it with orange, but occasionally you get a bit of a green hue, so I try to, let's put some brighter orange in there because I really do quite like that. And this, there we are, and then as it's coming down, the paper, we could maybe do a bit more. Oh, got a hair on my paper there, and maybe just do a bit of a yellow. Now another wee trick that I do is I use a water sprayer, and I just diffuse things a bit there too. So I'm just, oh, I didn't expect that to be quite as bright as it was. But I quite like that. There you are. So you can put one or two colours in here, and I always try and replicate some of the colour in the water because it would be reflecting. We'll put a wee bit of orange in as well. There we go. Not forgetting that orange, that lovely orange colour. Oh, we've got a little bit of green starting there, so I've got to be careful. And I'll just put that. So they always look different. It doesn't matter what you do, they do always look different. So I'm just going to use this spray, and it's just a fine mist sprayer. You can use anything at all like that, and just I'm really quite far away, about 12 inches above it, and I'm just giving it a small spray just like that. And what I can do then is I can actually walk the paint around the paper a bit, and I can actually get some really interesting shapes and things in. So I'm just going to let that tip up and push back slightly. Okay. The board that I'm actually painting on, it's slightly tilted, not too much, but it is a wee bit tilted. So can you see the colours starting to run up into the sky here? And because it's so random, it gives a really unusual effect as well, and that's what makes it really pretty. Now you sometimes get dribbles at the edges, so I'm just going to use my tissue just to wipe along a few of those edges like that. There we go. And then you would just leave that to dry off a bit. I might just, I think we might go a wee bit more intense with that orange, because once it dries, it actually dries lighter. Watercolour dries lighter, acrylic dries darker. So let's just see if we can bring some of that orange in here a bit, and because I know that it will dry just slightly lighter. Just bring that in. There we go. So I'm going to put this one off to one side now and let this one dry off, and we'll see if the other one's almost dry. So yeah, it's dry enough for us to work on, and as it dries it flattens out as well, you'll notice. So I really like that sky. It's not as dark as the sky that I did in the other one, but that doesn't matter. You could re-wet the whole thing and put darker in if you wanted to, but I think I like it like that. I think I'm going to leave it. So on this one, what I think we'll do is we'll just wet the area down a bit. I'm just looking for a brush. There we are. And I better get some more tissue at the ready. And I'm just going to just re-wet this a wee bit, and I'll show you why I'm doing that. You've just got to be careful, so I'm just going to let it run across there. I don't want to rub it too much, but it's just because I want to make that look like it's some dark bushes, and I want them to kind of run up into that water. So what I'm going to do is turn it upside down, and because the board is slightly tilted, it'll make this, where your waterline is here, it'll make it sort of spun out a bit. You'll see what I mean when I get. So I'm going to use indigo to do this, and I'm just going to dot them along here. That's maybe just a bit too wet. We'll just dry it off just slightly. There we go. And I'll get some of this indigo going. And you'll just see it starting to, what we call, bloom. And I'm doing this on purpose because I want it to look like bushes or trees way in the distance there. And don't make them all the same size, you know, you want some bigger than others, and some smaller. So just, and you can see all I'm doing is I'm just tapping that indigo all the way along here, and I'm getting these lovely blooms, which makes it look a bit like sort of soft trees, bushy trees in the distance. Okay, that's slightly wet too, I'll just dab that off. So let's make some fatter ones here, maybe a bit bigger one there. That's it. And can you see, doesn't that look pretty? I know it looks a bit odd upside down, so I will turn it the other way round in a second, but I'm just going to darken in some of the areas a wee bit, like that. Just in the base there, I'm just sort of getting it a bit darker. There we are. Now I'll just hold it so it's tipped a bit more. Look at that, isn't that beautiful? And it's really random, you don't know what it's going to look like, you know, it really does just bloom, and it looks lovely, and that's because of the water. So it's just sort of drifting into the water, and then as it's drying off, the paper is grabbing hold of the colour and just making it get this nice diffused effect. In fact, you can probably see there's some granulation going on here too. Quite a bit of that's happening because we use some alizarin crimson, and also indigo has got some properties of this granulation, they call it too. I think it's something within the paint, I'm not 100% sure, but I like the result of it. Okay, so what I think we could do too is, shall we have a wee bit of an islandy thing coming in here, and perhaps one here, and maybe one about there. So I've just mapped them out a bit, and I'm just going to wet that and just pull up odd little bits. I'll probably go in a wee bit darker in a minute, but I'm just making this quite soft for now. The same again on this side, just some grasses or something in there, and a bit here, but I'll get a thinner brush for this. There we go. So let me see, I've got that little thin brush that I was using before, and so we're just going to ground that in the water there a wee bit, like that, a bit darker. I've just put a bit of Payne's Grey on my brush just so it's slightly darker in the base. Can you see that? There we go. And then I'm just using a damp brush, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to encourage it just to trickle down slightly so that it just looks like a wee bit of a reflection from the grasses coming down into the paint. So it's just a damp brush, and I'm just tickling the edges of that paint that I've just put in, and allowing it just to come down, and it just gives it the effect that it's a wee bit of a reflection. And the same on the other side. So it's really just a damp brush, it's not too wet. If you do get it too wet, you can always just dab it off. Be careful though, because you don't want it running all the way down your page and ruining it. So, and I'm just going to push into that paint just a wee bit, tickle it, and it'll just drag it down slightly. And the same at the bottom here. So just wet that a little bit, and you can just see that starting to come, and it just looks like a little bit of a reflection. So I'm just walking that out a wee bit. Okay, and you can just use a damp brush to do this and get some nice little bits like that. Okay. So we could keep using this brush just for a second, and I'm just going to make a few more a little bit longery type grasses in here. So it could be that it's in the bank, maybe a few there to look like that, and some longer ones up there. And sometimes I'll just put the odd one down the way, and it gives it more of a realistic effect. It looks as if the grass is reflecting. There you go. Very simple and easy. Just put a bit more dark in the bottom of there, that's better. And perhaps just one or two grasses so that it looks a bit more like a reflection. There we go, you see? So the other thing I do sometimes too is I'll just use, I've got a tiny bit of paint on my brush here, and I just skim across just to make it a bit darker. In fact, I might use a thicker brush. And you're just wanting to get a wee bit of paint on your brush, not much at all, and I just sort of skim in, and where the wax is it's still going to resist, but it'll just give you a little bit more shadow, and it's just to show a bit of shadow where that sort of tree line is above there, and it'll just help give that illusion of, there we go. Do you see that? It's just slightly darker in that area. So we'll just put this one off to one side again, and we'll let that dry off, and we'll go back on to our other. We're back to this one, and it's turned out really nicely. So we are going to put some mountains in, I think. So what we can do is, so we're going to have 2 layers of mountains, and the back mountains, just making sure that that's dry. It's a wee bit damp, but I think we'll get away with it. So we want the mountains in the background to look like they're far away, and so they need to be lighter, and the ones that are coming forward want to be darker. Okay, because the ones in the background would look quite out of focus, and if you study that when you're driving along, you'll notice all the different colours, and a lot of things that are very far away, they lose the colour from the human eye, and we just see them as kind of greys. So that's another way of pushing something really far back, is to take the colour out of it and keep it more monotone. Right, okay, so we're going to use this sort of colour combination that we've got, because we don't want to start introducing weird and wonderful colours, but we need to keep it quite light. So I'm going to go really light, and then I can always darken it up a bit. So look, let's have a mountain coming up, and look, I'm just doing a bit of a wiggly line here. You know, I'm not being careful at all. I can put a nice mountain in there, maybe comes up the top like that, you see? And I'm now just using a damp brush just to bring that down to here, and we're going to put some mountains in the front of here too. So I might just perhaps darken that just slightly, because I just want it to show a wee bit. I wonder if I could maybe just pop a bit of the colours in that's in the sky in there, because that always looks really pretty that it's reflecting. Okay, maybe a slightly bit of orange. So I tend to do this, I go back and forth, and I think, oh, that might be a nice idea to do that, and you know, so don't stick to any rules, just experiment, and that's when it becomes a lot of fun. And if it goes wrong, you've only used this tiny bit of paper, so it doesn't matter, but you'll have learned something from it, you know, so it's certainly worth experimenting. And if you ended up with lots of little bits of paper like this that you had to throw away, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Right, so I'll just wet that down a little bit. I think I've maybe made it just slightly darker than I would want. I'll just soften that. So I'm just adding a bit of water to my brush, just so that I'm, there we are, I'll just put a wee bit of blue in there too, and that'll help. There we go. Now I'm just going to have to let that dry off a tiny bit, because when I try to put the other mountains on there, they would just bleed right up into it. So, and I'm not happy with this mountain's a bit too rounded, and it wouldn't really look like that in real life. And we get to study mountains all the time here. I live in the Highlands of Scotland, and it's so beautiful. I feel very blessed and privileged to live here. There's also a lot of beautiful wildlife that I really enjoy painting too. Okay, so we could just work on this water a little bit while we're waiting for that to dry. And what I think we'll do, we'll darken some of the areas up, and we'll do a little bit of blue. And I think what we'll do, because we've got quite a lot of blue in the sky here, I'm going to just darken this up a wee bit here to replicate that, and just give it a little bit more of oomph. So I'll just put, you see, and you're just, and it's skipping all that nice wax so that you're getting that nice effect, look. And I'm just, and my brush is almost dry. I've hardly, I mean, if I was to paint on my hand, there's hardly anything there. So it's almost a dry brush, and it is called dry brushing this, and you're just skimming your brush across the paper. Remember I said before that it's got sort of hills and valleys because it's very mottled, the paper. This is rough paper that I like to use, and especially for doing landscapes and seascapes, because you've got this nice rough texture to it. So that's quite nice, isn't it? It's a bit light at the bottom, but I'm going to put maybe a bit of land there or something. So I think what we will do is we'll just take a bit of this, maybe some green, make it nice and dark green here, and we'll make this look like perhaps it's just got a bit of land here. Sometimes I'll do sand, or you know, you can do all sorts of things, and I'm sure if we do some more of these paintings together we'll come up with lots of other ideas to do. So remember I said to you before that I really enjoy putting different colours in, so I'm just going to drop some indigo in there, and you see it just gives it a different effect there. It's just so that it's not just all plain colour, and maybe just a slight bit of that orange that's on there too. There we are, and that just looks like it's reflecting off slightly off the sky. Maybe a bit more like that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that wee tiny brush again, this one that I was doing the detail with. Can you see it? It's got a very small end there. I really got these very cheaply, so you can pick some brushes up really quite cheaply. I think when you get going and you really start enjoying it, you want to spend a bit more on your materials, but in the beginning you don't need to worry too much. As long as you get a nice weight of paper, use at least student quality watercolour, not really cheap watercolour paints, because they just don't have the pigment in them and it's just not quite as nice, you know. So I'm just going to pull some grasses up here like that, look, and pull some here. I could even put some speckles on there so it looks like there's perhaps something growing. Do you see, you don't have to really make anything look too realistic. It's just that suggestion. Your brain does the rest and tells you, oh look, there's a bit of land there, and there's some of those grasses that have got all those speckly bits on, and that's all you need, and that's enough for it to be pleasing to the eye, and it's also enjoyable for you to paint. So I'll just go in with a wee bit of the darker colour just here and there as well, just so that we've got a little bit, maybe a few more speckles like that. There we are, that's quite nice. And I think because I've got this on the brush, I'm just going to use some of that darker colour just to come in here and there, just to create a little bit of drama there. So just on that side. That's it. Sometimes you just feel like you want a little bit more colour. So you just play around with it until you have it how you would like it. There isn't any rules, you can just do whatever you want. Okay, so let's see, they're still quite wet, so just put it off to one side again. And look at that, isn't that lovely? Now, something that I really love to do to just make things look slightly more realistic, I like to put a few wee birds in here. So I just use this little fine detail brush again, and I'm just going to do sort of little ticks. I'll just turn that over and show you. So I'll do it big so that you can see. So it's just that kind of effect and sometimes a bit of a body like that to make them look like birds in the sky, but we'll do them much smaller because we're working on a really small area. So I'm wetting my brush quite a bit because I want the paint to flow nicely when I'm doing this. I don't want it to dry out. And I'm just dabbing off anything that's got on this metal bit here. Is called the furl, and it often has a droplet of water comes running down, and just as you put it down on your page it goes splat. So I usually just tap it off onto my tissue to try and catch any bits. I don't always remember to do it, but if you can remember, it's certainly worth it. Okay, so let's have some wee birds. So we could have, let's have some up here. There. Maybe like that. And there we go, that's quite nice, isn't it? Maybe put one more in. One more, getting greedy. So we don't always have to put the body in. If they're too far away you wouldn't be able to see it anyway, but I sometimes put one or two in, the bigger ones. So the ones that are bigger, they're sort of nearer to us. They are. I might even put one down like that as well. Okay, so I think we can call that one done. We'll go back to this one now and see if it's drier. So there we go. Let me see if I can. I think I'll get away with it. It's maybe dried off, but when you're doing it at home, just make sure it's nice and dry. Okay, so what I need to do is make these mountains that are in front of these back mountains a lot darker, well not a lot darker, but darker, so that they push forward. And I'm going to make up a nice bluey green to do that. Now I just want to check that it's not too dark. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's maybe not dark enough. Oh, it's starting to bloom a bit, but we might get away with it. Let's go with it and see. I might regret it. I might be saying to you, why did I just not let it dry? Okay, so we could have one coming up here like that, and let's have one coming up like this. Okay, and just fill that in. There we go. And you can do any shapes you want. There's no hard and fast rules to this. If you are actually painting an actual place, then obviously you would follow the contour lines of the mountains, but because we're just having a practice and we're just playing around here and really just experimenting, we're not worrying too much whether they're correct. You know, they don't need to be absolutely spot on. Let's have a look. I might just put a little bit of a dab of that orange in there, just a bit of a glow, and it will look like that's reflecting slightly. There we go, and I'm just going to paint that down like that. There we are. Now in the base of the mountain, I do like to do it just slightly darker, and it just helps them sit in the ground a bit more. They don't look like they're floating around. Just go slightly darker there. There we are. Now the other thing I like to do, sometimes I'll do a little bit of a reflection in the water, a bit like we did with the bushes before. So I've just got a damp brush. I'm just going to wet this a bit. It really is just damp. It's not too wet at all. And I'm just going to get a wee bit of those colours. And I'm just kind of going to replicate slightly where the humps and bumps of that mountain is. Can you see? And it kind of just looks like you've got a wee bit of a reflection going on. Maybe put a tiny bit of orange in that too, just so it looks a bit more realistic. So just on that bit there was a bit of orangey colour here, and there. So it's not exact, but it gives you that idea that there's a bit of a reflection. Okay, so I think we're going to put some wee birds in this one as well, and once we've done that, I think we're done. So I will remember a nice wet brush when you're using this wee tiny one, because you want it to flow, and I'm just remembering to dab off. And we could have, let's have a look, we could have some here and here. There. Oh, let's. We could have these in a. Maybe really small. There in the background. About 1, 2 there as well. Okay. So I really hope you've enjoyed painting with me again, and oh dear, what have I done? I hope you've really enjoyed painting with me, and it's given you some ideas and inspiration to go ahead and have a go yourself. Please check out some more of my videos. I'm hoping to make more as I'm going along, and I'm trying to make a really nice beginners start off for everyone to do, and then once we get you going we can maybe get on to some more advanced. Okay, bye bye everyone, bye!